The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her tactical vest for what felt like the 100th time. The weight of her equipment had become second nature after 18 months deployed in Afghanistan. But today something felt different. The air carried an unusual stillness that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Her squad of 8 soldiers moved carefully through the narrow mountain pass, their boots crunching softly on loose gravel. Intelligence reports had indicated Taliban movement in the area, but the specifics remained frustratingly vague. Command had ordered a reconnaissance mission to gather more information about enemy positions and supply routes. Maria had earned her stripes the hard way, rising through the ranks in a male-dominated field through sheer determination and skill. Born in a small Texas town to immigrant parents, she had joined the military straight out of high school, seeking both purpose and opportunity. Her father, a construction worker, had been skeptical about his daughter's choice, but her mother had quietly supported her decision. The team consisted of experienced soldiers who had served together for months. Corporal Jake Mitchell, the communications specialist, stayed close to Maria's left shoulder. His dry sense of humor had kept morale up during their darkest moments. Private First Class David Chun handled demolitions and had an uncanny ability to spot improvised explosive devices before anyone else. Sergeant Tom Rodriguez served as the team's medic and had saved more lives than he could count. Behind them walked Specialist Amy Foster, their sharpshooter, whose steady hands and keen eyes had provided cover fire during numerous firefights. Private Marcus Johnson, barely 20 years old, carried the heavy machine gun with surprising ease despite his slight frame. Corporal Lisa Park managed intelligence gathering and spoke fluent Pashto, making her invaluable during interactions with local populations. Finally, Private Sam Williams rounded out the group as their designated marksman and backup medic. The mission parameters seemed straightforward enough. They were to establish observation posts along 3 strategic ridgelines, document any Taliban activity, and report back to base within 72 hours. What intelligence had failed to mention was the complex network of caves and tunnels that honeycombed the entire mountainside. As they climbed higher, Maria noticed fresh footprints in the dust. The prints appeared recent, perhaps made within the last few hours. She held up her fist, signaling the squad to halt, then motioned for Chun to examine the tracks more closely. His experience with tracking had proven reliable in the past. Chun knelt beside the prints, running his fingers along the edges where the dust had been displaced. At least 12 individuals, he whispered, moving east toward the valley. These boots are typical Taliban issue, probably stolen from Afghan military supplies. The intelligence briefing had mentioned increased Taliban activity in the region, but the presence of such a large group suggested something more significant than routine patrols. Maria made the decision to alter their route slightly, following the trail at a distance while maintaining their primary mission objectives. The landscape around them told stories of countless conflicts. Bullet holes scarred ancient stone walls, and the twisted remains of Soviet-era equipment lay scattered in hidden ravines. Afghanistan had seen foreign armies come and go for generations, leaving behind only memories and metal fragments that would rust under the relentless sun. Local villagers in the area had grown wary of all military presence, regardless of nationality or stated intentions. Too many promises had been broken, too many lives disrupted by the endless cycle of violence. Maria understood their reluctance to trust, having witnessed firsthand the complexity of winning hearts and minds while fighting an insurgency. The squad reached their first observation point by midday. The elevated position offered excellent visibility across the valley floor, where a dusty road connected several small settlements. Through her binoculars, Maria could see normal civilian activity: farmers tending fields, children playing near mud brick houses, women carrying water containers from the central well. Foster set up her rifle on the rocky outcropping, adjusting the scope for optimal clarity. Her training at sniper school had emphasized patience above all else, and she settled into position with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to long hours of surveillance. The other squad members established security positions around the perimeter. Rodriguez unpacked his medical supplies, conducting a routine inventory check. His careful attention to detail had saved lives when ammunition ran out, but bandages and morphine could mean the difference between survival and death. Every mission carried the possibility of casualties, and preparation remained their best defense against the unexpected. Park monitored radio communications, listening for any chatter that might provide additional intelligence about enemy movements. The Taliban had grown increasingly sophisticated in their use of technology, often employing encrypted communications and cell phone networks to coordinate operations. Her linguistic skills and technical training made her the team's eyes and ears in the electronic warfare domain. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Maria noticed unusual activity near one of the villages. Several pickup trucks had arrived, and armed men were unloading equipment. The distance made identification difficult, but their movements suggested military training rather than civilian behavior. Williams used his spotting scope to get a closer look. Definite Taliban presence, he reported quietly. I count at least 20 fighters, possibly more inside the buildings. They're setting up what looks like a command post in the largest structure. The discovery represented exactly the kind of intelligence their mission was designed to gather. Maria began drafting a preliminary report for transmission to headquarters, but before she could complete it, Park intercepted radio communications that changed everything. They know we're here, Park whispered urgently. Someone reported our presence to the Taliban forces in the village. They're organizing search parties to locate our position. The situation had deteriorated rapidly from reconnaissance to potential combat. Maria weighed their options carefully. Retreating immediately would ensure their safety, but might compromise the mission's intelligence objectives. Staying in position could provide valuable information, but risked engagement with superior numbers. Mitchell worked frantically to establish communication with base, but atmospheric conditions and mountainous terrain interfered with radio signals. The isolation that made their observation posts strategically valuable also cut them off from immediate support. Chen identified multiple egress routes, marking them on his tactical map with practiced efficiency. Years of training had taught him to always plan for contingencies, and his preparation might now determine whether the squad escaped or faced overwhelming odds in an unwinnable firefight. Johnson checked his machine gun's ammunition supply, ensuring the weapon was properly positioned to provide covering fire if retreat became necessary. His youth belied his competence with heavy weapons, and his calm demeanor under pressure had earned the respect of more experienced soldiers. Foster maintained her watch through the rifle scope, tracking the movement of Taliban fighters as they organized search parties. Her count had increased to nearly 30 armed individuals, far exceeding their squad's capabilities in direct confrontation. Discretion clearly represented the better part of valor. Maria made the tactical decision to withdraw to an alternate position deeper in the mountains, where they could continue surveillance while reducing exposure to discovery. The squad began packing equipment with practiced efficiency, moving with the quiet precision that separated professional soldiers from amateur fighters. As they prepared to leave their observation post, Park intercepted another radio transmission that froze everyone in place. The Taliban forces weren't just searching randomly. They had specific information about the American patrol size, composition, and general location. Someone had provided detailed intelligence to the enemy. The implications were staggering. Either local villagers had spotted them and reported their presence, or there was a more serious security breach in their operational planning. Maria realized their mission had been compromised from the beginning, turning what should have been a routine reconnaissance into a potentially deadly trap. Williams spotted movement on the ridgeline above their position. At least 6 Taliban fighters were working their way down the mountainside, attempting to flank the American position while other groups approached from the valley floor. The coordinated nature of the movement suggested experienced military leadership rather than improvised militia tactics. Mitchell finally established intermittent contact with headquarters, but the signal quality made detailed communication impossible. He managed to transmit their approximate coordinates and situation status before atmospheric interference cut the connection again. Help would not arrive quickly enough to affect their immediate circumstances. Rodriguez distributed additional medical supplies among the squad members, knowing that wounds sustained in remote locations often proved fatal due to delayed evacuation. His field experience had taught him that preparation and quick action could overcome many medical emergencies, but they needed to survive the initial contact. Chen identified a narrow canyon that might provide concealment during their withdrawal, but reaching it would require crossing open ground under potential enemy observation. The tactical situation continued deteriorating as Taliban forces tightened their encirclement, leaving fewer options with each passing minute. Park monitored enemy communications, trying to determine the exact number of opposing forces and their intended strategy. The radio chatter suggested a well-organized operation with multiple elements converging on the American position. Her translation revealed discussions of capturing prisoners for propaganda purposes rather than simply eliminating the threat. Foster tracked individual Taliban fighters through her scope, noting their equipment and apparent training level. Many carried modern weapons and moved with military discipline that suggested formal instruction rather than guerrilla experience. The enemy they faced represented a more dangerous threat than typical insurgent forces. Johnson prepared his machine gun for sustained fire, knowing that their only chance lay in fighting their way out of the developing trap. His position provided good fields of fire down the mountainside, but ammunition limitations meant every shot had to count in any extended engagement. Maria studied the tactical situation, looking for any advantage that might allow her squad to escape without casualties. The enemy held superior numbers and advantageous positions, but American training and equipment might offset those disadvantages if they moved quickly and decisively. The first rifle shots echoed across the mountains as Taliban scouts made contact with the American perimeter. Foster responded immediately, dropping one fighter with a precise shot, while others dove for cover among the rocks. The engagement had begun, and there would be no easy withdrawal now. Williams provided supporting fire as the squad began their fighting retreat toward the canyon Chun had identified. Bullets ricocheted off stone surfaces, sending rock fragments flying in all directions. The sound of automatic weapons filled the air as both sides settled into serious combat. Rodriguez moved between squad members, checking for wounds and ensuring everyone remained combat effective. A grazing bullet had torn through Johnson's sleeve without causing serious injury, but the near miss reminded everyone of their vulnerable situation. Park continued monitoring enemy communications while providing cover fire with her rifle. The Taliban were calling for reinforcements and discussing tactics for preventing the Americans from escaping the area. Their determination suggested this represented more than a chance encounter. Mitchell worked desperately to re-establish communication with headquarters, knowing that air support or rapid response forces might still influence the outcome. His radio crackled with static and broken transmissions, but no clear signal could penetrate the mountainous terrain. Chun led the withdrawal toward the canyon, moving carefully to avoid exposing the squad to crossfire from multiple directions. His knowledge of the terrain and tactical movement kept them alive as bullets whistled overhead and impacted the rocks around them. Foster provided precision fire to keep Taliban fighters pinned down while her teammates moved to better positions. Her marksmanship training proved invaluable as she eliminated threats at extended ranges that would have been impossible for standard infantry weapons. The fighting intensified as more Taliban forces arrived, surrounding the American position with overwhelming numbers. Maria realized their situation had become desperate, with ammunition running low and no immediate prospect of rescue or reinforcement. As the sun began setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Maria made a decision that would haunt her squad for months to come. Rather than continue a hopeless fight that would likely result in everyone's death or capture, she ordered her team to surrender, hoping to save their lives even at the cost of their freedom. The Taliban fighters emerged from their positions, weapons trained on the Americans as they slowly raised their hands. Maria felt the weight of command crushing down on her shoulders as she watched her soldiers' faces, knowing she had just made the most difficult decision of her military career. The enemy fighters approached cautiously, clearly aware of American military capabilities even in surrender. Their leader, a bearded man in his 40s wearing a mix of military and civilian clothing, spoke briefly in Pashto before gesturing for the Americans to move toward the valley floor. As they were marched away from their positions, Maria caught glimpses of the extensive Taliban force that had surrounded them. The operation had involved nearly 50 fighters, suggesting significant planning and intelligence gathering that went far beyond chance encounters with American patrols. The capture of an entire American squad represented a major propaganda victory for the Taliban, and Maria knew their situation would likely become international news within hours. She could only hope that her decision to surrender would ultimately prove correct, keeping her soldiers alive for potential rescue or prisoner exchange. The march down the mountainside began as darkness fell, with Taliban fighters using flashlights to navigate the treacherous terrain. Maria's squad walked in single file, hands secured behind their backs, each lost in private thoughts about what lay ahead in captivity. The Taliban compound sat hidden in a remote valley, accessible only through narrow mountain passes that had been used by smugglers and fighters for generations. Ancient stone walls enclosed a collection of buildings that served multiple purposes: weapons storage, training facilities, and now a makeshift prison for American soldiers. Maria and her squad were separated immediately upon arrival. The Taliban had learned from previous prisoner situations that keeping captives together increased their ability to plan escapes or resistance. Each soldier was placed in a different building, isolated from their teammates, and left to wonder about their fate. Maria's cell was a windowless room carved from the mountainside, with thick stone walls that muffled sound and prevented any communication with other prisoners. A small opening near the ceiling provided minimal ventilation and the only source of natural light. The floor was dirt, and a thin blanket served as her only comfort against the cold mountain nights. The first weeks of captivity established a routine designed to break down psychological resistance. Guards brought meager portions of rice and bread twice daily, barely enough to maintain basic nutrition. Water came from a bucket that was refilled irregularly, forcing prisoners to ration carefully to avoid dehydration. Interrogation sessions began on the third day. Taliban intelligence officers, some speaking fluent English, attempted to extract information about American military operations, troop movements, and strategic planning. Maria provided only her name, rank, and service number, adhering to the code of conduct despite increasing psychological pressure. The interrogators employed sophisticated techniques that went beyond simple physical coercion. They claimed to have captured other American units, showing photographs that might or might not depict real prisoners. They described detailed knowledge of Maria's personal background, including information about her family in Texas that could only have come from extensive intelligence gathering. Sleep deprivation became a constant weapon against the prisoners. Guards would wake Maria at irregular intervals throughout the night, demanding answers to the same questions asked during formal interrogations. The lack of rest made concentration difficult and weakened mental defenses against psychological manipulation. During daylight hours, Maria could hear sounds from other parts of the compound: vehicles arriving and departing, voices speaking in Pashto and Arabic, and occasionally what might have been her squad members being moved between buildings. The uncertainty about her soldiers' conditions added another layer of stress to her already difficult situation. The Taliban guards ranged from young fighters barely out of their teens to experienced veterans who had fought against Soviet forces decades earlier. Some showed curiosity about their American prisoners, asking questions about life in the United States through broken English. Others demonstrated clear hostility, viewing the captives as representatives of foreign occupation. Medical care was minimal and provided only when injuries or illness threatened prisoners' lives. A Taliban medic with basic training treated cuts and infections, but without proper supplies or antiseptics. Maria developed a persistent cough from the damp conditions and poor air quality, but received no treatment beyond occasional aspirin tablets. Communication with the outside world was completely cut off. No Red Cross visits, no letters from home, and no information about diplomatic efforts to secure their release. The isolation was designed to create despair and convince prisoners that they had been forgotten by their government and military. Food became an instrument of control and punishment. Prisoners who cooperated during interrogations might receive slightly larger portions or occasional pieces of fruit. Those who remained defiant found their already meager rations reduced further, creating a constant struggle between maintaining resistance and basic survival needs. Personal hygiene became increasingly challenging as weeks turned into months. Bathing opportunities were rare and brief, limited to a few minutes with cold water and harsh soap. Clean clothing was provided sporadically, often garments taken from other prisoners or purchased in local markets. The psychological impact of prolonged isolation began affecting all the prisoners. Maria struggled with depression and anxiety, fighting against despair while trying to maintain hope for rescue or release. The absence of meaningful human contact, except for hostile interactions with guards and interrogators, wore down mental defenses that had seemed unshakable during training. Physical exercise was limited to the confines of her small cell. Maria developed a routine of calisthenics and stretching that helped maintain muscle tone and provided mental focus. The discipline required to maintain physical fitness became a form of resistance against her captors' attempts to break her spirit. Intelligence gathering became a survival skill. Maria learned to interpret guard conversations, even without understanding Pashto, by observing body language and vocal tones. She memorized faces, counted patrol schedules, and noted any patterns in compound activity that might prove useful if escape opportunities arose. The Taliban leadership remained largely invisible to the prisoners. Occasionally, well-dressed men would arrive in expensive vehicles, conducting business in the compound's main buildings. These visits sometimes coincided with changes in treatment or movement of prisoners between facilities. Weather became a significant factor in prison conditions. Summer brought stifling heat that made the stone cells unbearable, while winter introduced bitter cold that penetrated through inadequate clothing and blankets. The extreme temperatures added physical stress to psychological pressure. News from the outside world came in fragments, usually as taunts from guards claiming American military defeats or political developments that supposedly meant prisoners would never be released. The accuracy of such information was impossible to verify, but the psychological impact remained significant regardless of truth. Religious pressure represented another form of coercion. Taliban clerics would visit prisoners, offering improved treatment in exchange for conversion to Islam. They presented theological arguments while subtly threatening consequences for those who refused to listen to religious instruction. Educational backgrounds among the guards varied dramatically. Some were illiterate farmers who had joined the Taliban for economic reasons, while others had received formal schooling and could discuss complex political and military topics. The diversity of their captors made predicting behavior and finding potential allies extremely difficult. Escape planning became a constant mental exercise, even though opportunities seemed non-existent. Maria mapped the compound layout from memory, identified guard rotations, and considered potential weaknesses in security. The planning provided psychological relief and maintained hope even when actual escape remained impossible. Medical conditions among the prisoners gradually deteriorated without proper nutrition and health care. Maria noticed symptoms of vitamin deficiency and suspected that some of her squad members might be developing more serious health problems based on sounds from other buildings. Propaganda efforts included forced participation in videos that the Taliban could use for international media. Prisoners were coerced into reading prepared statements criticizing American foreign policy, with threats of violence against uncooperative individuals or their squad mates. Mental discipline became crucial for maintaining sanity during long periods of solitary confinement. Maria developed meditation techniques, recalled detailed memories from her childhood and military training, and created elaborate mental scenarios that provided escape from immediate circumstances. The compound's location remained mysterious, but environmental clues suggested they were still in the same general region where the squad had been captured. The altitude, weather patterns, and distant mountain views indicated they had not been moved far from their original mission area. Cultural exchanges with guards sometimes provided insights into Taliban motivations and strategies. Younger fighters often expressed curiosity about American society, while veterans shared stories of previous conflicts that revealed tactical knowledge and organizational capabilities. Seasonal changes brought different challenges and opportunities. Spring thaws created muddy conditions that affected guard patrols, while autumn harvests meant increased activity as local farmers brought crops to market through nearby valleys. The psychological impact of prolonged uncertainty about her squad's fate weighed heavily on Maria's mind. Leadership responsibilities didn't disappear with capture, and she constantly worried about her soldiers' physical and mental condition while being unable to provide support or guidance. Communication attempts with other prisoners required extreme caution. Guards were alert to any signs of coordination between captives, and punishment for unauthorized contact could be severe. Maria developed subtle methods of leaving messages or signals that might reach her squad members. Economic factors influenced prisoner treatment as negotiations for ransom or prisoner exchanges apparently continued in background diplomatic channels. The Taliban viewed their American captives as valuable assets that needed to be maintained in reasonable condition for potential future transactions. Training scenarios from military schools had covered prisoner of war situations, but the reality proved far more challenging than any simulation could replicate. The combination of physical discomfort, psychological pressure, and complete uncertainty created stress levels that tested every aspect of mental and emotional preparation. Guard relationships became complex interactions involving elements of mutual curiosity, hostility, and grudging respect. Some Taliban fighters admitted privately that they found American soldiers professional and disciplined, even while maintaining ideological opposition to their presence in Afghanistan. Intelligence about rescue operations filtered through guard conversations and visitor discussions, though the accuracy remained questionable. References to American military activity in the region suggested ongoing efforts to locate and recover the missing squad, providing hope while creating additional psychological pressure. The compound's defensive preparations indicated that the Taliban expected eventual assault attempts by American or Afghan forces. Weapon positions, escape routes, and contingency plans suggested sophisticated military thinking that went beyond simple prisoner-holding operations. Personal items confiscated during capture became subjects of intense emotional attachment. Maria's watch, wedding ring, and photographs represented connections to her previous life that took on symbolic importance far beyond their material value. Dreams and sleep patterns reflected the psychological impact of extended captivity. Nightmares about combat situations mixed with vivid memories of home and family, creating emotional swings that required constant mental discipline to manage effectively. Medical knowledge gained through military training became valuable for treating minor injuries and illnesses without access to proper healthcare. Maria shared what knowledge she could with other prisoners through limited communication opportunities. The Taliban's organizational structure became gradually apparent through observation of guard behaviors, visitor interactions, and overheard conversations. Understanding the hierarchy and decision-making processes provided insights that might prove valuable during eventual escape or rescue attempts. Language barriers created both frustrations and opportunities. Learning basic Pashto phrases helped Maria understand guard conversations and sometimes enabled more effective communication about basic needs like food, water, or medical attention. Hope remained the most critical element for psychological survival. Maria maintained faith in American military capabilities and diplomatic efforts while preparing mentally for the possibility that rescue might never come. The balance between optimism and realism became a daily struggle that defined her existence as a prisoner of war. 6 months into captivity, Maria had learned to read the rhythms of the compound like a survival manual written in human behavior and environmental changes. The autumn rains had begun, turning the courtyard into a muddy mess that affected guard patrols and created new patterns of movement she studied carefully from her small window opening. The breakthrough came during a conversation between two guards outside her cell. Speaking in Pashto, they discussed an upcoming operation that would take most of the compound's fighters away for several days. Maria had spent months learning fragments of their language, piecing together vocabulary and grammar through careful observation and listening. Abdul, the younger guard who sometimes showed curiosity about American culture, mentioned that only a skeleton crew would remain to watch the prisoners. His companion, an older fighter named Rashid, seemed concerned about security but acknowledged that the operation's importance required maximum personnel participation. The discussion revealed that a high-value target had been identified in a neighboring province, requiring a coordinated assault involving fighters from multiple Taliban cells. The opportunity represented the kind of mission that could advance careers and provide significant propaganda value if successful. Maria's heart raced as she processed the implications. For the first time since capture, a realistic escape opportunity might present itself. However, success would depend on precise timing, careful coordination with her scattered squad members, and overcoming numerous security obstacles with minimal resources. Over the following days, she observed increased activity throughout the compound. Weapons were cleaned and organized, vehicles received maintenance, and maps were studied in lengthy planning sessions. The anticipation was palpable among the guards, who spoke excitedly about the upcoming mission. The compound's layout had become intimately familiar through months of careful observation. Maria knew which buildings housed her squad members, understood guard rotation schedules, and had identified potential weapons caches and escape routes. The accumulated intelligence might finally prove valuable. Communication with her fellow prisoners remained extremely limited, but Maria had developed subtle methods of passing messages through the complex network of maintenance workers, food servers, and other support personnel who moved between buildings. Most were local villagers pressed into service, and some showed sympathy for the American prisoners. Jamil, a teenage boy who brought water and cleaned the cells, had become an unwitting ally. His broken English and natural curiosity created opportunities for brief conversations that went unnoticed by guards. Maria had slowly built rapport with him, learning about his family and village while sharing carefully selected stories about America. The plan forming in Maria's mind required splitting into phases. First, she needed to coordinate simultaneous action among all squad members. Second, they would need to overcome their guards and secure weapons. Third, they must capture Taliban fighters to serve as both human shields and sources of intelligence for their escape route. Weather conditions would play a crucial role. The autumn storms created noise that could mask movement and reduced visibility for sentries. However, the same conditions would make travel through mountainous terrain extremely dangerous, especially for soldiers weakened by months of inadequate nutrition and exercise. Maria began subtle preparations, maintaining her fitness routine while appearing to comply fully with prison routines. She studied guard personalities more intensively, identifying which individuals might be most susceptible to surprise attacks and which represented the greatest threats during escape attempts. The compound's weapon storage sat in a central building that served multiple functions. Guards regularly moved between the armory and their posts, creating predictable patterns that could be exploited. However, accessing weapons would require overpowering guards without alerting the entire compound to escape attempts. Intelligence gathering intensified as Maria listened carefully to every conversation within earshot. References to the upcoming operation provided details about timing, personnel allocation, and security arrangements that would be left in place during the main force's absence. Psychological preparation became as important as physical planning. Maria knew that escape attempts in hostile territory carried enormous risks, and failure would likely result in execution rather than return to prison. The decision to act represented a calculated gamble with lives hanging in the balance. Communication with squad members accelerated through increasingly bold message passing. Using Jamil as an intermediary, Maria sent coded information about timing and coordination requirements. The risk of discovery grew with each contact, but the approaching opportunity might not come again. Foster's response came through scratched symbols on a water bucket that confirmed her readiness and provided intelligence about guard numbers in her section. Chun managed to pass information about explosives stored near his location that could be used to breach walls or create diversions during escape. Rodriguez indicated through food container markings that he had been maintaining medical supplies taken from guards during treatment sessions. Johnson used clothing arrangements visible from adjacent buildings to signal his physical condition and weapon requirements for effective resistance. Park's linguistic abilities had provided crucial intelligence about guard conversations, which she conveyed through complex symbol arrangements in her cell window. Williams reported through intermediaries that he had identified potential vehicle access points and fuel storage locations. The Taliban's departure schedule became clear through increased planning discussions and preparation activities. The main force would leave at dawn in 3 days, traveling light to maintain operational security. Approximately 15 guards would remain to secure the compound and surrounding area. Maria refined the escape plan based on accumulated intelligence and available resources. The operation would begin during morning prayers when remaining guards would be distracted. Squad members would simultaneously overpower their immediate guards, secure weapons, and converge on the compound's central courtyard. Timing would be critical because any delay would allow guards to organize effective resistance or call for reinforcement from the departing main force. The entire operation needed completion within 30 minutes to maintain surprise and prevent overwhelming counterattacks. Weather reports suggested continued storms for several days, providing both challenges and opportunities for the escape attempt. Rain would mask movement and reduce visibility for pursuing forces, but would also make navigation through unfamiliar mountain terrain extremely difficult. The psychological impact on guards became an important factor in planning. Many Taliban fighters had developed routine relationships with prisoners that created false confidence about security. The sudden transition from passive captives to aggressive combatants would provide crucial moments of shock and confusion. Maria's leadership responsibilities weighed heavily as she considered the risks to her squad members. Military training emphasized duty and resistance to captivity, but the practical reality involved life or death decisions that could result in casualties among her soldiers. Equipment preparation required careful improvisation using available materials. Torn clothing could serve as restraints for captured guards, while metal fragments from deteriorating buildings might function as crude weapons. Every resource needed maximum utilization for mission success. The compound's defensive positions had been designed to repel external attacks rather than contain internal uprising. Guard posts focused outward toward potential rescue attempts, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited by prisoners with detailed knowledge of internal layouts and routines. Intelligence about surrounding terrain came from months of observation through cell windows and conversations with guards who discussed local geography. Mountain passes, village locations, and potential safe houses provided escape route options that might lead to friendly forces or neutral territory. Cultural factors influenced guard behavior in predictable patterns that could be exploited during escape attempts. Prayer schedules, meal times, and social interactions created opportunities when attention might be divided or reduced. Understanding these patterns was crucial for timing coordination. The Taliban's communication systems represented both threats and opportunities. Disrupting radio equipment would prevent calls for reinforcement, but the same systems might be needed for coordination with potential rescue forces. The balance required careful consideration during operational planning. Motivation among squad members varied based on individual circumstances and mental states after months of captivity. Some soldiers showed signs of depression that might affect performance, while others demonstrated intense determination to escape regardless of personal risks. The moral implications of taking hostages created ethical dilemmas that military training had not fully addressed. Using captured Taliban fighters as human shields violated conventional rules of engagement, but survival in hostile territory might require such difficult decisions. Local population sympathies remained unclear, but potentially crucial for escape success. Some villagers might provide assistance to escaping Americans, while others could report their presence to Taliban authorities. Reading local attitudes accurately could determine mission outcomes. Resource allocation during escape would require harsh decisions about equipment priorities and personnel capabilities. Wounded or weakened squad members might slow movement enough to compromise everyone's safety, creating leadership dilemmas with no clear solutions. The Taliban's reaction to prisoner escape would likely involve massive search operations and brutal retaliation against anyone suspected of providing assistance. The consequences for local populations added another layer of moral complexity to escape planning. Navigation challenges in mountainous terrain without proper equipment represented major obstacles to successful escape. Compass directions, distance estimates, and route selection would rely entirely on memory and basic survival skills learned during military training. Food and water requirements for extended movement through hostile territory exceeded any resources they could reasonably expect to acquire during escape. Survival would depend on reaching friendly forces or safe territory within days rather than weeks. Medical considerations included treating existing health problems while managing injuries likely to occur during combat and escape movement. Rodriguez's medical training would be crucial, but without proper supplies, even minor wounds could become life-threatening complications. The psychological impact of killing Taliban guards during escape attempts would affect squad members differently based on their combat experience and personal beliefs. Mental preparation for necessary violence represented another aspect of pre-mission planning. Communication with American forces would require reaching areas with cell phone coverage or radio relay stations. The Taliban had effectively isolated their prisoners from electronic communications, creating significant challenges for coordination with potential rescue operations. Weather monitoring became an obsession as Maria watched cloud formations and precipitation patterns through her small window. The timing of their escape attempt would depend heavily on conditions that could either assist or devastate their chances of survival. Final preparations accelerated as the Taliban departure approached. Every detail of timing, coordination, and contingency planning was reviewed mentally while maintaining normal prisoner routines to avoid suspicion. The next 72 hours would determine whether months of planning resulted in freedom or death. Guard behavior showed subtle changes as departure preparations intensified. Normal routines were disrupted, creating both opportunities and uncertainties that required constant adaptation of escape plans. Flexibility would prove as important as detailed preparation for mission success. Dawn broke gray and cold as the main Taliban force departed the compound, their vehicles disappearing into mountain mist like ghosts returning to the shadows. Maria watched through her cell's small opening as approximately 40 fighters loaded equipment and weapons, leaving behind a skeleton crew of 15 guards to maintain security. The moment had arrived. 6 months of observation, planning, and psychological preparation condensed into the next few hours that would determine whether her squad lived or died. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs, but years of military training kept her movements calm and deliberate. Abdul approached her cell at exactly 0800 hours, carrying the morning meal of rice and bread. His routine had become predictable through months of observation, and today that predictability would cost him dearly. Maria positioned herself beside the door, using the wall for concealment while appearing to sit normally. As Abdul inserted the key and pushed open the heavy wooden door, Maria exploded into motion. Her left hand grabbed his wrist while her right arm wrapped around his throat in a sleeper hold perfected during combat training. Abdul's eyes widened in shock, but before he could cry out, pressure on his carotid arteries sent him into unconsciousness. Maria caught Abdul's falling body, lowering him silently to the floor. She quickly secured his hands and feet with strips torn from her blanket, then gagged him with fabric from her sleeve. His AK-47 rifle and ammunition magazines provided the firepower needed for the next phase of operation. Moving to the cell door, Maria listened carefully for sounds indicating other guards had noticed anything unusual. The compound remained quiet except for distant conversations and normal activity. She checked her watch, synchronizing her timing with the coordinated assault her squad members should be launching simultaneously. Foster's building sat approximately 50 meters across the courtyard, with 2 guards normally stationed at the entrance. Through careful observation, Maria knew that 1 guard typically moved between buildings during morning routines, leaving a single sentry who often became distracted by radio conversations. Maria moved along the building's wall, using architectural features for concealment while advancing toward Foster's location. The autumn mud muffled her footsteps, and gray morning light provided sufficient visibility without exposing her movements to distant observers. The lone guard at Foster's building stood with his back turned, speaking into a handheld radio about routine security matters. Maria approached from his blind spot, waiting until he finished transmission before striking. A sharp blow to the base of his skull dropped him instantly, and she dragged his unconscious form inside the building. Foster emerged from her cell already prepared for action, having overpowered her guard using similar tactics coordinated through their message system. Her face showed the strain of months in captivity, but her eyes burned with fierce determination that made Maria proud of her soldiers' resilience. Chun and Rodriguez secured their sections, Foster whispered, gesturing toward the eastern buildings where smoke signals confirmed successful operations. Johnson had complications, but Williams moved to assist. Park's signal shows all clear in the northern compound. The coordinated assault had succeeded beyond expectations. 7 Taliban guards were now unconscious or neutralized, their weapons and equipment captured by the American soldiers. However, 8 guards remained scattered throughout the compound, and the real challenge was just beginning. Maria led Foster toward the central armory where additional weapons and ammunition could arm the entire squad for sustained combat. Intelligence gathered during captivity indicated that heavy weapons, including rocket-propelled grenades and machine guns, were stored in the reinforced building. Chin appeared from behind a storage shed, carrying an AK-47 and leading 2 bound Taliban fighters who stumbled along with blindfolds covering their eyes. His demolitions expertise had enabled him to capture explosive devices that could breach locked doors or create diversions during their escape. Rodriguez has 3 prisoners secured, Chin reported quietly. Johnson was wounded during his assault, but remained operational. Williams captured 2 guards near the vehicle compound and reports successful acquisition of transportation assets. The mathematics of their situation were becoming clear. Against 8 remaining Taliban guards, the American squad now fielded 7 combat-effective soldiers with captured weapons and tactical advantages of surprise and superior training. More importantly, they held 9 Taliban prisoners who could serve as human shields and intelligence sources. Park joined the group with her 3 captured guards, their hands secured behind their backs with electrical wires salvaged from compound maintenance supplies. Her linguistic skills would prove crucial for interrogating prisoners and gathering intelligence about escape routes and Taliban response capabilities. The remaining guards are organizing resistance, Park reported after listening to radio communications. They've called for backup from nearby cells, but response time should be several hours given the weather and terrain conditions. Williams and Johnson approached from the vehicle compound, Johnson's left arm bandaged with strips torn from Taliban clothing. Williams carried keys to several trucks and had successfully disabled other vehicles to prevent pursuit attempts. "We have 2 operational vehicles with fuel," Williams announced. "One heavy truck capable of carrying everyone, plus a smaller pickup for reconnaissance or diversion. I destroyed the fuel pumps and radiators on 3 other vehicles." Rodriguez conducted quick medical assessments of both American and Taliban casualties. Several guards had suffered injuries during capture, requiring basic medical attention to prevent complications that might slow their movement. Johnson's wound was superficial but needed proper bandaging. The compound's layout provided multiple exit routes, but Maria knew that Taliban reinforcements would establish roadblocks on obvious approach routes. Their best chance lay in traveling through difficult mountain terrain that vehicles couldn't navigate, using captured prisoners as guides and insurance against pursuit. Maria gathered her squad for final coordination before departing the compound. The next phase required moving through hostile territory while managing 9 prisoners, reaching friendly forces, and avoiding Taliban search operations that would begin within hours of their escape being discovered. "Our primary objective is reaching American lines," Maria announced. "Secondary objectives include preserving prisoner intelligence value and avoiding casualties among our own personnel. We'll use standard patrol formations with prisoner security taking priority over speed of movement." The interrogation of captured Taliban fighters began immediately, with Park translating questions about local geography, nearby military positions, and potential safe routes toward American-controlled territory. The information gathered would determine their survival chances during the next 24 hours. Mahmoud, the senior Taliban fighter among the prisoners, initially refused cooperation but changed his attitude when Maria explained that his survival depended on providing accurate intelligence. The prospect of being left behind in the mountains without food or shelter proved more persuasive than ideological commitment. 3 main routes lead from this valley, Mahmoud admitted through Park's translation. "The northern pass requires climbing equipment we don't possess. The southern route follows roads that will certainly be watched. Only the western canyon offers concealment, but it's extremely dangerous during storms." Weather conditions were deteriorating as predicted, with heavy clouds building over the mountain peaks and wind speeds increasing throughout the valley. The approaching storm would provide concealment but make travel treacherous, especially for personnel weakened by months of captivity. Equipment distribution became crucial for mission success. Each squad member received captured weapons, ammunition, and basic supplies salvaged from the compound. The Taliban prisoners were given minimal gear necessary for survival during forced march through difficult terrain. Chen's explosives expertise proved valuable for creating improvised booby traps that would delay pursuing forces. Simple devices using captured grenades and tripwires could inflict casualties and force Taliban searchers to advance more cautiously, buying time for the American escape. Foster's marksmanship skills were assigned to rear guard duties, providing covering fire if pursuit became direct combat. Her captured sniper rifle and ammunition could eliminate threats at extended ranges that might otherwise overwhelm the small American force. Communication equipment salvaged from guard posts enabled monitoring Taliban radio traffic and potentially contacting American forces if they reached areas with appropriate signal coverage. However, using radios also risked revealing their location to enemy tracking capabilities. The vehicle selection presented strategic decisions about speed versus concealment. The heavy truck could carry everyone but would be easily spotted and tracked by aircraft. Splitting forces between multiple vehicles increased tactical flexibility while creating coordination challenges. Medical supplies captured from the compound included basic trauma equipment that Rodriguez organized for treating anticipated injuries during movement through hostile territory. Pain medication and antibiotics could mean survival for wounded personnel unable to reach advanced medical care. Food and water requirements for 11 people moving through mountains exceeded any supplies they could reasonably carry. Success would depend on reaching friendly forces within days rather than weeks, making route selection and movement speed critical factors. The Taliban prisoners were organized into a movement formation that balanced security against mobility requirements. Guards were assigned to specific prisoners, with lethal force authorized if escape attempts endangered American personnel or mission success. Navigation would rely primarily on terrain features and captured maps, supplemented by compass bearings when weather permitted. The compound's location was approximately 40 kilometers from the nearest American outpost, requiring movement through extremely difficult terrain. Cultural considerations affected prisoner management, as Taliban fighters might prefer death to capture and potential interrogation. Understanding their motivations and breaking points could influence cooperation levels during the escape march. Weather monitoring indicated approximately 6 hours before the full storm arrived, providing a narrow window for covering maximum distance before conditions became completely unsuitable for movement. Timing would determine whether they reached shelter or faced exposure in mountain wilderness. Final equipment checks revealed limitations that would affect mission execution. Ammunition supplies were adequate for defensive engagements, but insufficient for prolonged combat. Food and water would last approximately 2 days with careful rationing. The compound's defensive preparations had included communication equipment that enabled contact with Taliban leadership, but using such systems risked revealing American escape plans to hostile forces organizing pursuit operations. Intelligence gathered from prisoner interrogation suggested that Taliban reinforcements were already mobilizing in response to lost contact with the compound guards. The window for clean escape was closing rapidly, requiring immediate departure despite incomplete preparation. Guard rotation schedules indicated that the compound's absence would be noticed within hours when routine check-ins failed to occur. American forces needed maximum distance from the facility before search operations began with aircraft and tracking specialists. Local population attitudes remained uncertain, but potentially crucial for escape success. Some villagers might provide assistance or at least neutral passage, while others could report American movements to Taliban authorities, compromising escape routes and timing. The psychological impact of extended captivity on squad performance was difficult to assess, but potentially significant. Months of inadequate nutrition and exercise might affect combat effectiveness and endurance during demanding movement through mountain terrain. Resource prioritization required difficult decisions about equipment and supplies that could be carried during movement. Every pound of weight would matter during climbing and extended marching, but insufficient equipment could prove fatal in combat situations. The Taliban's likely response to prisoner escape would involve massive search operations and brutal retaliation against suspected sympathizers. The consequences for local populations added moral complexity to decisions about seeking civilian assistance. Maria made the final decision to depart immediately, accepting incomplete preparation rather than risking discovery by returning Taliban forces. The squad formed movement formation with prisoners secured and equipment distributed according to tactical requirements. As they prepared to leave the compound that had been their prison for 6 months, each soldier carried hope mixed with realistic awareness of the dangers ahead. Success would require everything their training had taught them about survival, combat, and leadership under impossible circumstances. The first 24 hours of escape tested every survival skill the squad had learned during years of military training. Maria led her soldiers and 9 Taliban prisoners through treacherous mountain terrain as storm clouds gathered overhead, turning the rocky landscape into a nightmare of slippery surfaces and limited visibility. By evening, they had covered approximately 15 kilometers through terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers under ideal conditions. The Taliban prisoners, initially defiant, had grown increasingly cooperative as the reality of their situation became clear. Survival depended on mutual cooperation rather than ideological conflicts. Williams established communication with American forces using captured radio equipment, transmitting coded messages that confirmed their escape and approximate location. The response brought both relief and concern. Rescue operations were mobilizing, but Taliban forces were also organizing massive search efforts throughout the region. The second day brought the full fury of the autumn storm. Rain turned to sleet, then snow, as they climbed higher into mountain passes that offered concealment, but threatened hypothermia for personnel already weakened by months of captivity. Rodriguez worked constantly to treat symptoms of exposure among both Americans and prisoners. Foster's marksmanship proved crucial when Taliban pursuit forces made contact during the afternoon. Her precision shooting from concealed positions eliminated 3 hostile fighters and forced others to maintain distance, allowing the American force to continue movement while avoiding direct engagement with superior numbers. Chen's demolitions expertise created effective delaying actions using improvised explosive devices placed along obvious pursuit routes. The psychological impact of casualties and constant threat of booby traps forced Taliban searchers to advance more cautiously, buying precious time for the escape. Navigation became increasingly challenging as weather conditions deteriorated and familiar landmarks disappeared behind clouds and precipitation. Maria relied heavily on Mahmud's knowledge of local geography, despite concerns about trusting information provided under duress by enemy prisoners. The third day brought a breakthrough when Park intercepted radio communications indicating that American aircraft were conducting search operations in their general area. However, the same transmissions revealed that Taliban forces had requested foreign fighter reinforcements and sophisticated tracking equipment. Food supplies reached critical levels as the group struggled through mountain terrain that demanded enormous energy expenditure. Rationing became severe, with each person receiving barely enough calories to maintain basic function. Hunting opportunities were limited by security concerns and ammunition conservation. Johnson's wound became infected despite Rodriguez's best efforts with limited medical supplies. Fever and weakness forced modifications to movement plans, slowing progress while increasing vulnerability to pursuit forces. The moral dilemma of leaving wounded personnel behind created tensions within the squad. Communication attempts with rescue forces faced persistent challenges from atmospheric conditions and mountainous terrain that blocked radio signals. Brief contacts provided location updates, but couldn't guarantee coordination for pickup operations in hostile territory. The Taliban prisoners represented both assets and liabilities as the escape continued. Several provided valuable intelligence about terrain and enemy dispositions, while others required constant surveillance to prevent escape attempts that could compromise American security. Weather improvements on the fourth day allowed helicopter overflights that provided both hope and danger. American aircraft conducted search patterns while Taliban forces used the same conditions to increase their pursuit efforts. Recognition signals became crucial for avoiding friendly fire incidents. Park's linguistic abilities enabled monitoring of Taliban communications that revealed the scope of search operations. Hundreds of fighters were combing the mountains, supported by tracking specialists and equipment that could detect movement patterns invisible to casual observation. The breakthrough came when Foster spotted American patrol signs during reconnaissance of a potential rest area. Military equipment caches and communication relays indicated nearby friendly forces, but reaching them required crossing open ground under potential enemy observation. Chen modified explosive devices to create diversionary blasts that drew Taliban attention away from the American route of approach. The coordinated deceptions allowed movement across vulnerable terrain while hostile forces investigated false leads several kilometers away. Medical emergencies multiplied as the physical strain of extended movement through harsh conditions exceeded the capabilities of personnel weakened by captivity. Rodriguez's skills were tested beyond normal limits as he treated everything from altitude sickness to severe injuries. The Taliban prisoners began showing signs of physical breakdown that threatened mission success. Carrying wounded enemy fighters would slow movement unacceptably, but leaving them behind violated military ethics and eliminated intelligence assets that might prove crucial. Intelligence gathered through prisoner interrogation revealed that Taliban leadership considered their capture a major propaganda victory worth enormous resources to recover. The search operations involved coordination between multiple cells and represented the largest manhunt in the region for months. Navigation landmarks finally became recognizable as they approached areas Maria remembered from their original mission 6 months earlier. The familiar terrain provided psychological relief, but also indicated they were entering areas with established Taliban presence and defensive positions. Communication breakthroughs enabled direct contact with American rescue forces who provided updated intelligence about enemy positions and safe routes toward pickup locations. However, coordination remained challenging due to rapidly changing tactical situations. The final approach to American lines required crossing territory actively contested between friendly and hostile forces. Recent combat operations had left the area scattered with unexploded ordnance and improvised explosive devices that created additional hazards for movement. Foster's rearguard actions became more frequent as Taliban pursuit forces closed distance and began attempting direct engagement. Her ammunition supplies reached critical levels, forcing conservation measures that reduced covering fire effectiveness during vulnerable movement phases. Chen's remaining explosives were reserved for final defensive positions if extraction attempts failed. The psychological preparation for last-stand scenarios created sobering awareness that survival remained uncertain despite approaching friendly territory. Rodriguez established communication with medical evacuation teams who prepared for treating severe malnutrition, exposure injuries, and combat wounds among both American and prisoner personnel. The medical challenges exceeded normal combat casualty protocols. The Taliban prisoners were organized for transfer to American custody, with intelligence value assessments determining priority for medical treatment and interrogation. Several fighters possessed information about regional operations that could influence ongoing military campaigns. Weather conditions again deteriorated as they approached the final objective, creating visibility problems that hampered both friendly recognition and enemy tracking. The timing of extraction operations would depend heavily on atmospheric conditions beyond anyone's control. Physical exhaustion reached dangerous levels among squad members who had pushed their bodies beyond normal endurance limits during the escape march. Adrenaline and determination were no longer sufficient to overcome the accumulated effects of malnutrition and exposure. The first sight of American positions brought overwhelming emotional relief tempered by awareness that safety remained uncertain until extraction was completed. Taliban forces were still actively pursuing, and final engagement remained possible during vulnerable pickup operations. Communication with extraction teams revealed the scope of rescue operations mobilized to recover the missing squad. Multiple aircraft, ground forces, and intelligence assets had been committed to the effort, representing significant resource allocation during ongoing military campaigns. Security preparations for prisoner transfer required careful coordination to prevent escape attempts or violence during handover procedures. The Taliban fighters represented valuable intelligence assets, but also security risks that needed management by trained personnel. Medical evaluation revealed the extent of physical deterioration among squad members after months of captivity, followed by extreme physical demands during escape. Recovery would require extended rehabilitation rather than simple rest and nutrition. Intelligence briefings indicated that their escape had significantly disrupted Taliban operations in the region, forcing resource reallocation and revealing operational capabilities that would influence future American military planning. The final helicopter extraction took place under combat conditions as Taliban forces made desperate attempts to prevent prisoner recovery. Covering fire from American ground forces enabled successful pickup despite hostile contact during vulnerable loading operations. As the aircraft lifted away from hostile territory, Maria watched the mountainous landscape disappear below while holding the hands of soldiers she had led through 6 months of captivity and a harrowing escape that tested every aspect of their training and character. The debriefing process would continue for weeks as intelligence specialists extracted every detail about Taliban operations, prison conditions, and regional security situations. However, the immediate priority was medical care and psychological support for personnel who had endured extraordinary stress. News media coverage of their return created international attention focused on the successful escape and prisoner capture that demonstrated American military capabilities despite challenging circumstances. The story became symbolic of military resilience and professional competence under extreme conditions. Awards and recognition followed the successful operation, but Maria focused primarily on ensuring her squad members received appropriate medical care and support during their recovery process. Leadership responsibilities didn't end with mission completion. The Taliban prisoners provided intelligence that influenced regional military operations for months afterward. Information about organizational structure, operational capabilities, and strategic planning affected American tactical approaches throughout the theater of operations. Personal relationships within the squad had been strengthened by shared adversity that created bonds beyond normal military camaraderie. The experience of survival under extreme conditions forged connections that would last throughout their careers and beyond. Psychological evaluation revealed varying degrees of post-traumatic stress among squad members, requiring individualized treatment approaches that addressed specific symptoms and coping mechanisms. Recovery would be a long-term process requiring professional support. The successful escape and prisoner capture represented a significant intelligence coup that provided insights into Taliban operations previously unavailable through other collection methods. The strategic value exceeded the immediate tactical success of personnel recovery. Family reunions brought overwhelming joy tempered by awareness of changes that months of captivity and combat stress had created in relationships that would require time and patience to rebuild. The emotional challenges of readjustment matched physical recovery demands. Military career implications varied among squad members, with some choosing to continue active duty while others decided that civilian life offered better opportunities for healing and personal growth. The experience had changed everyone in fundamental ways. Training programs were modified based on lessons learned from the escape operation, incorporating improved survival techniques and prisoner handling procedures that could benefit future military operations. Knowledge gained through adversity became valuable for other soldiers. The compound where they had been held was later destroyed in American airstrikes, eliminating the facility and sending a clear message about consequences for taking American prisoners. The tactical and symbolic value of the operation extended beyond immediate military objectives. Maria's leadership during captivity and escape earned recognition that advanced her military career, but personal satisfaction came primarily from bringing her soldiers home alive despite impossible circumstances. Success was measured in lives saved rather than personal advancement. The 9 Taliban prisoners captured during escape provided ongoing intelligence value through extended interrogation and analysis. Their cooperation, motivated initially by survival needs, eventually produced strategic information that influenced regional security operations for years. Recovery and rehabilitation continued long after the immediate crisis had passed, but the successful mission demonstrated that American military training and leadership could overcome even the most challenging circumstances through determination, skill, and mutual support among professional soldiers.